So for all of us, it's that little essence that comes into the world and is going to weather all those future stages to come. And right from the start, we can start thinking about that ageless self that we've talked about in the past, right? And we can ask ourselves, how are you still the same as you always were? Okay, so we have our unconditional positive regard down. We have our listening skills down. We are ready to start reminiscing through the stages of our human development. In a series of segments, we're going to briefly move through birth, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, midlife, and older adulthood and our elder years. Now, my hope for us is that just by pausing for a moment to contemplate each stage, we gain just a little bit of perspective about this thing called life. Each stage has its own challenges and its own anxieties, but each stage also has its own sweetness, if not sometimes bittersweetness. And when we take them all together, I think what really happens is that we see just how vulnerable we really all are. We all share this. So some of us get a little luckier than others, I think, in how the world meets us in this vulnerability. That's definitely true. But each stage is actually fraught with human vulnerability, and this is okay. And this is something I think that we come to accept more as we get older, as we age. And I think that this really ultimately brings us a certain sort of maturity and a compassion. As we go through these stages, though, all we're really trying to do is just to catch little snapshots of the things you've enjoyed, little snapshots of the people you have loved, and really little snapshots of who you are, and why this is good, why your being here has been a good thing. Even if there have been points in life where it felt like you were maybe just getting through, right? Because we all have those too. Remember, though, that getting through is good. I think that what we see through all these little snapshots are kind of like little reflections of our essence. So that's really what we're looking for. So we'll start. We'll start with the day that you were born, which is where that little essence began. Do you know much about your birth or your early infancy? Some people do, some people don't. You can take a minute and bring to mind any details that you might be aware of. Things like the weather on the day. Sometimes people know that. Some details of the birth itself, where people were, the place. Sometimes your siblings' responses to your birth. That's a big one for people. Maybe your parents' reactions, your early health, or your mother's health after the birth. Now, don't worry if you don't have much of this. It's a little tricky to reminisce about things we can't actually remember, isn't it? So don't worry about it. And of course, if you were adopted, you may have very little of this too. Now, here are some other details and things for us to think about. Do you know why your name was chosen? That's the first point, A name is one of the first sources of identity that we're given. And sometimes it can tell us about what was going on for our parents around the time that we were born. Things like who they envisioned we might be, and sometimes the things that they had already projected onto us. But of course, along the way, we might have also made this name our own, by deciding on what we liked about it, or taking on nicknames, or seeing, how it felt to be called this or that. So a question for you is, how do you feel about your name? Do you like it? Does it suit you? How do you wear it? What does it say about you? When we go through these questions, you can pause the video at any point, as the questions kind of come up, and take some time to either think about them or even write a few things down. So here's another one. What do you know about your early temperament? So for example, were you a sleeper? Were you easygoing? Were you shy, gregarious? Or were you a holy terror, as one woman affectionately described her son to me once? Her son was actually there with her when she said this, and I kind of got the impression that this was getting kind of old. He was getting a little bit tired of the holy terror description, And so as I was sitting there with them, I asked her, I said, do you mean that he was really quite busy and curious with lots of energy, right? And I could see them both pause for a minute. because there was a lot actually going on there when I asked them to kind of consider when a holy terror might actually be a good thing. Was there a good face to this? So, were there other ways to understand this child's temperament? That's what I was really saying. Holy terror, when directed correctly, can actually be a good thing. Now, the point I'm trying to make here is this man was getting some mixed messages about his early temperament. And actually, we all do. This is pretty normal. Even the best parents have trouble understanding their children and reflecting them back accurately all the time. And certainly parents under pressure can miss things, and children can try to show them this in all kinds of challenging ways, don't they? We're all a little familiar with this, both as children and as parents. Now, what I'm really trying to point out here, though, is that this sort of human imperfection that was going on in the mirroring between this woman and her child, this human perfection will characterize each and every stage of your human development. And it starts right here this early. But the big question really is, how did that child's innate energy and curiosity develop and bring good things into the world, even despite the human vulnerabilities in this stage? That's a really big question, and it starts very early. So a little bit of this unique person's essence is there right from the start. And how is the environment going to impact that and shape that essence? Big stuff. Now, you were born with a little temperament, the early beginnings of an identity, and regardless of how this was met in the early environment, good things have come from this. So if you were a sensitive child and this maybe frustrated people at some point, that's an example, I can still assure you that wonderful things have resulted from that sensitivity, right? Things you don't even think about. If you were strong-willed and this was met with a little consternation at times, I can assure you, good things have come from that strong will. Often things you don't even think about. That young man, who was seemingly a holy terror, was actually doing amazing things. He was challenging the status quo all around him, shaking up complacency, bringing fresh energy into his workplace and into his family, So over time, that early energy and curiosity fashioned itself into the makings of a formidable leader. Not a perfect one, I should state, not by any stretch, but a dynamic one, right? So this is a child who began life sort of demanding something different from his parents than his other siblings, and he went through life demanding something different from those around him. And apart from the many interpersonal hiccups which often came with this, for the most part, the outcomes of this were good. So for all of us, it's that little essence that comes into the world and is going to weather all those future stages to come. And right from the start, we can start thinking about that ageless self that we've talked about in the past, right? And we can ask ourselves, how are you still the same as you always were? And it's okay if the answer to that is a bit of a paradox, by the way. If you were, for example, if you're very fair, right? But you're a little bit stubborn, right? And that's a bit of a paradox. Or if you're very creative, but you're a little disorganized. Or if you're very kind-hearted, but a little bit impractical at times, or very protective of the people that you love, but a little hard to talk to. That's okay. Remember, it's these paradoxes that make you human, and also that make you a little bit interesting.